Hello, everybody. Welcome into Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. We have a big show today. It's our final show of the week, and we have a lot to cover. We're going to cover as much as we can heading into the weekend of the NBA and NHL playoffs. We're also going to talk some MLB news. Robo-umps are not coming in 2025. We'll talk about whether or not that's a good idea. And then the big news, the death of amateurism in the NCAA. We will talk about all of that and more coming up later on in this show, so stick around for that. But we're going to start off our show talking about the big games from last night that took place in the NBA. But before we get into that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. Appreciate all of you for tuning in and watching on a Friday afternoon, but we have a lot to cover. Once again, that link is on the screen right now, gsmcpodcast.net. But like I was saying, we are going to take a look, start off our show today, as we often do in these NBA playoffs, talking about the NBA game from last night, that being the Celtics versus the Pacers. The Celtics taking a 2-0 lead in this series behind a 40-point game from Jaylen Brown, along with a bunch of other things. And the main headline from this game is the Celtics have dominated, and Haliburton's injury is a bigger piece of this puzzle, because if you were tuning in and watching this game, as much as the Celtics kind of controlled the pace of this game the entire way, the Pacers kept finding ways to get back into this game until Haliburton went out. I mean, even deep into that third quarter, there were times when the Celtics were going up by 13, going up by double-digit points. The Pacers, more often than not, were able to get it back in. They got it to within 2 at that second half, and then Tyrese Haliburton goes down. He's out for the rest of the game, and the Pacers don't have that juice. And I know losing your best player is a huge, huge loss for a team like the Pacers, but losing this game hurts even more, right? You now have a team that feels kind of lost, that should have won game one. They lose their star in Tyrese Haliburton, and then they lose this game by 16. And 16 might look like a blowout, it might look like this game wasn't close, but it was close for a lot of the time. They held Jason Tatum to almost nothing in that first half. They held, Jaylen Brown was going off. There's nothing they could do. He had a 25 point or so first half, and then he kept it going into the second, and he was unstoppable last night. So before I go too far, I want to give him all the props, all of his flowers, because he played an incredible game. 40 points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists, and he kept them in that game. He kept them going, even when Jason Tatum was struggling, which is exactly what they needed. This is the kind of game. This is the kind of reason that they held on to Jaylen Brown. In the last offseason, there were talks of the Celtics trading Jaylen Brown. It's expensive to have 2 supermax players on your roster. It's not something that's easy to build a team around, and yet they've found a way to do it, and you're seeing why it's so valuable to have 2 guys of that caliber. I was talking to a friend of mine. He was asking me who the best duo in the NBA left is, and to me, it's not really that big of a question that it's Tatum and Brown. He kind of looked at me sideways, saying, "What about Luka and Kyrie?" I think Luka's the best player left in the NBA right now in the conference finals. But if you take a look at the players that when you're talking about a duo, you have to look at the best 2. And I think Tatum and Brown together, you saw it especially last night in that game too, when Tatum was really playing awful. Like, he goes through these stretches, especially in the playoffs, it seems, where he plays awful, but he is the guy, and then you see Jason Tatum be able to come in and hold the slack, keep that team alive, keep them into it. But how this loss reflects on a team like the Pacers as opposed to a team like the Celtics with this win is completely differently, obviously. If they had Haliburton, I think they keep this a close game. I think if Haliburton is able to play for that fourth quarter and that back half of the third quarter, unfortunately he leaves with that knee, with that lower leg injury, as they're calling it. But if he's able to play, I think this game is a single digit game at least. I think he makes up for at least 7 points in here, and we have to see how bad that injury is. He's obviously had injury troubles with his leg injury all season long. He had that hamstring injury that bothered him. And remember, at the beginning of the season, he was in MVP conversations. He was leading this Pacers teams to new heights that they hadn't seen since the Paul George era. And I mean, he still has. He leads them to a conference final since for the first time since Paul George. But you know, this Pacers squad without Tyrese Haliburton, we saw in that second half of that game, were unable to keep it together, and it is a shame. Hopefully, Tyrese Haliburton is able to keep playing, and that it's not a big deal because the Pacers can give the Celtics a fight, at least without Kristaps Porzingis down there, as we've seen in these first two games. Undoubtedly, they should have won game one, and they didn't, and they blew that. And after losing game two in the fashion that they've now lost game two, it is a brutal loss in game one, and it kind of takes all the wind out of their sails. Now, they have been a very good team at home in the playoffs. You don't have to look much further than round two against the Knicks. They fall down 2-0 just like they did in this series, and it was in pretty convincing fashion as well. They fall down 2-0. They win both games at home, go back to New York, and then they're able to take game 6 at home and game 7 in New York. So they did not lose a single game at home in their last series. That home court advantage has been awesome. I believe if you go back to the regular season, they've now won around 20 straight games in a row at home. They're somewhere around that mark. I'm curious to see how game 3 plays out. Now, in a series where you don't have your best player going against arguably the best team in basketball, definitely the best roster on paper in basketball, it is really, really tough. But the Pacers are a team that can go out and they can score 120 points with ease because they play with pace, and both of these teams play with pace. That's why we've seen these back-to-back high-scoring games for these two teams, and high scoring is a different level in the playoffs. Obviously, they play a little more physical, let more things go, so you're going to see a little bit of lower scoring games than we're used to in like the beginning of the regular season, where teams are putting up 155 points. But scoring 120 is pretty good. It's pretty good. And the Pacers and the Celtics both have the offensive capability to do that. So taking a look at the future of this series in particular, we'll take it down two roads, right? Road one, Tyrese Haliburton comes back and is able to play. It's not an injury that keeps him out, and he's able to be 100%. Now, that's important. Tyrese Haliburton strikes me as a guy that's going to want to be out here, even if he's not 100% in the conference finals. If he's there and he's 100%, the Pacers, I don't think they have a shot to win this series anymore. Going down 2-0 against a team like the Celtics is tough. Now, injury luck can happen. Maybe they can win this like they did against the Knicks when the Knicks got incredibly hurt. But that's never something you should or can count on. And it seems like it's the Pacers' turn to get hit with the injury bug with Haliburton going down here. If he's back 100%, I think they can take 1 or 2 games here at home and make it look like a series. I still don't think they're going to be able to pull it out. I just think this talent gap between the Pacers and the Celtics is too big. I mean, you go star for star, the Celtics win that matchup every single time. Other than maybe at center, and they're going to need some quality minutes from their bench guys. Without Haliburton, you're going to need some of their shooters to step up and shoot better. They're going to need Obi Toppin and T.J. McConnell to come off the bench and continue what they've been doing. They have both been huge parts of this playoff run, both of them off the bench, providing energy, and they've both been playing great, which has been a huge help for a team like the Pacers, who are kind of struggling a little bit who would be struggling a lot without their energy off the bench. So we'll see how bad this injury is for Haliburton. If Haliburton is unable to keep going and he can't play game 3, I don't know if the Pacers will win a game. I think that, I mean, we saw it really. This was a you can split this game up into the pre-Haliburton injury and the post-Haliburton injury, and the Celtics were doing their thing the whole time, but the Pacers just did not have the juice to come back after that Haliburton injury, and they were hanging tough before it. Like I said, they cut that lead to 2 in the third quarter, and then Haliburton goes down, and they're unable to mount any more comebacks, and you can see they kind of get demoralized there. They go back home. Like I said, they've been a great, great home team. I expect them to give them a bigger fight in Game 3, even without Haliburton. If Haliburton plays Game 3 and is 100%, I think they'll win that game. If he's not playing, I think it'll be close at least. So we'll see what happens over the weekend. Game 3 and Game 4, I would believe, would be on Monday. So keep an eye out for that. We'll keep you updated on that series as it continues to develop. But let me know what you think. Jaylen Brown went off, kept the Celtics alive and kicking. It was a close first quarter, and then they kind of just took control of the rest of that game, the Celtics did. But yeah, let me know what your thoughts are on the Celtics-Pacers series. In our next segment, we are going to talk a little bit about the settlement that went through in the NCAA. We talked a little bit about it earlier this week. We're going to go more in depth about what that means for the future of the NCAA, how the NCAA has built itself over the past 100 years, and how this completely shakes the foundation of the entire organization. So stick around for that. We'll be right back on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. Everybody in the world, please Lord, give me a sign. I want to be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement. The top is so vacant. I don't need shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Getting my way and to be put down. It ain't replaced. I'll get my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it. The news that fits. I'm losing shit. A stupid myth. You choose to live, but choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh. Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we just finished breaking down Game 2 between the Celtics and the Pacers, in which we saw the Celtics get a 16-point W, go up 2-0 in that series. Haliburton goes down in the third quarter with an injury. That is going to be a back blower, but that's going to be a backbreaker, for the Pacers. And we'll see if they can recover from that, how serious of a lower leg injury it is. He has dealt with a lower leg injury in the past this season, and he has not come out the same since then. We'll see exactly if he's able to bounce back or not in the future of that series, though. In this segment here, we're going to transition out of basketball, do a little bit of talk about the NCAA. And this is a story that is really interesting to me. The NCAA, they have officially settled in the House versus NCAA case. We covered that story a little bit and what it meant for the smaller conferences earlier this week. You can go check that out if you are interested. I believe we covered it on Tuesday. You'd have to go check. I don't remember. But in this segment, we're going to talk more broad about the NCAA organization as a whole and how this affects it. But before we get into that, Remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message will pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a question, a burning question about sports, go ahead and leave it in the comments. Go ahead and leave it in a tip or donation. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I love to hear from you guys, so if you have anything you would like to say, go ahead and put it in that chat for me. But like I said, this is a topic that is really intriguing to me, and I've titled this "The Death of Amateurism" because when you look at the NCAA as a whole, you can go back 100+ years, or about 100 years, to the creation of what we would call the modern NCAA, and it has been built on this idea of amateurism. This idea of, we don't have to pay these players, this is how it works, they are students. But now with this settlement, this House versus NCAA settlement going through and officially being settled, the NCAA and these Power 5 schools are the only ones that had to agree to this, and we kind of went over the ramifications of that in our other segment on Tuesday of how the smaller conferences don't get a voice on this either. But now they get the go-ahead to pay their players. The budget, I believe, is around $20 million. And people are framing this as, hey, it saved college sports. They would have gone bankrupt, which, the amount of lawsuits that are being lined up and how this protects them for future lawsuits, you might be right. They might be right. This might have protected them, might have protected the organization of the NCAA from completely collapsing. But it hasn't. Maybe monetarily it has. But when you look at if you go and you strip the NCAA of everything that's outside and you go to its core pillar, the core pillar of the NCAA for its entire history has been this term amateurism. And that is gone now. What they have done is they have just taken out the support beam from the entire house that is the NCAA, and we're going to see if it can stand. We're going to see if how big the NCAA has grown, and the support of football, of just football, paying its players, or these football and basketball, these revenue generating sports, can keep the house of the NCAA afloat, because it stands on amateurism, and it has. And now that blanket, that veil of amateurism is gone, there is not a lot left to protect the NCAA. It's a house without support now, and it's something that's good, right? I want to come out here before I get too far into my rant and say that this is a good thing. This is a good change. Pay the players that deserve to get paid. They're out there, they're making money for your university in some instances, and they are, doing their best here, getting notoriety out there. We talked a little bit about how sports can get your university, the name of your university out there, and everything like that. So we'll see how this affects that. The smaller schools we talked about earlier, but amateurism as a whole is now gone. The NCAA has to, and it's patchwork. It's patchwork right now. They don't have laws along every state or federally. There's certain laws in certain states of how you can handle it, and it's going to be completely patchwork until something gets passed federally or by the NCAA outlining the rules of how you can pay players. Because if you start a system like this, you have to start to draw up CBAs, because they don't want, the NCAA does not want the universities to pay their players directly. They don't want them to be employees. They want them to be students. And again, it's a good thing that they're getting paid. It is. They deserve to get paid. They're putting their bodies on the line for an organization bigger than themselves. Most of these players aren't going to get to the next level to get paid. And it's a good thing that they have the ability to get paid at this point. But what the NCAA doesn't want, and what they need to figure out, is if they're making them salaried employees or not, because that opens up a whole new can of worms. How are you going to pay the 80th man on the roster? Does the 80th man on the roster get a check just because number one is getting this NIL money now? You're allowed to pay them. How is this going to work? Is it going to be NIL? Is it going to be employee salary? There's a lot more questions than answers that are out right now. But what has been stricken right now is the entire idea of amateurism, which has been built, is what the NCAA built its entire structure on from the beginning of its organization. Uh, this is what this is the biggest change. This is the biggest change in the history of the NCAA, and we'll see if they can survive this. There are many scenarios in which the NCAA just does not exist in 10 years after this. And this is a good stepping point. This is a good start for change, but it doesn't guarantee that it continues to exist. And it's something that we need to keep our eyes on. It has this settlement protects them from future lawsuits, which gives them a little bit of blanket of security to fix this emergency situation. But there's a lot more questions than answers. Like Kelsey is saying here in the YouTube comments, how many of the coaches get paid? The coaches get paid a lot of money. They get paid millions and millions of dollars. It's a huge undertaking for these universities. It's a huge financial undertaking for these universities, especially the smaller ones. They have to pay off this $2.7 billion settlement, and then they have this whole new financing ability now, which sports, like I've said, are a great way to get your university's name out there. For instance, March Madness. These small schools that go on runs. Florida Gulf Coast back in, what was that, 2015. UMBC when they beat Virginia in 2018. These schools, they got their names out there through athletic programs, and it's good for your university, and it opens up a whole new can of worms. It's very exciting. It's a brand new time, and all these schools need to adapt, and the NCAA also needs to adapt. This is a groundbreaking change in the NCAA, and I'm very, very, very excited to see exactly how they are able, how they want to handle this, how they're going to handle this. If it were up to me, I don't know if I would give them salaries per se, because again, that's kind of what is different from college levels as opposed to professional levels. I am all in favor of NIL. The NIL is a system that I've been pushing for a while. Name, image, likeness. If there's a company that wants to pay them to be in commercials, if they want to get money for their name, for their images, for advertisements, for signing stuff, let them get money for that. But I think it just gets way too complicated for how big of an organization the NCAA is and how different it is between a school like Alabama and a school like James Madison or a school like UMBC, that has completely different levels of funding for their programs. It's not just, you're not going to be able to do an all-encompassing thing for a Texas A&M that gets hundreds of millions of dollars from their boosters every single season, and a Harvard who probably doesn't get that much for athletic funding. There's not one rule that's going to fix this. So I think as far as paying players from the university, it gets a little complicated. But NIL, I'm a big fan of. So there's a lot of stuff that still needs to be figured out. But amateurism is dead now. And that, like I said in the beginning of this, is the fundamental structure that the NCAA was built on. And we'll see if they can evolve. Because if they can't, they're going to fall. And we'll see what picks up the pieces, or if they're able to keep it going. I'm very excited for the future of college sports. Let me know your thoughts in the comments on any of this. Anything involving college sports, everything is going to change. So, very, very exciting times. But in our next segment, we're going to move out of college sports, move on to the ice, talk a little bit about a double overtime game that took place last night, Game 1 of the Western Conference Finals between the Edmonton Oilers and the Dallas Stars. We saw double overtime. So, very, very excited. We will be right back on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube. Absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you were just tuning in, we just finished talking about the groundbreaking news, the settlement between the NCAA in the House versus NCAA case. It's going to completely change the future of college sports. We also talked a little bit about the Celtics Pacers game in segment 1. In segment 3 here, we are going to move off of both of those sports and subjects and move on to the ice. There was a double overtime game, the second straight double overtime game involving the Dallas Stars. They just made it past in Game 7 there, and now we are here in Game 1. So we'll talk about that in just a second. But before we do, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net, leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you have a burning question about sports, go ahead and leave it in the comments in the comments. We'll get to it as soon as we possibly can. But like I was saying, we are going to get into the NHL double overtime game between the Stars and Oilers in Game 1 of the Western Conference Finals, and it was an incredible game. As Kelsey was saying, yes, Connor McDavid was the hero in double overtime. He almost had one in the first overtime period, but was stopped by Jake Ottinger on one of the greatest saves that I've seen in a very long time. Stick save with a wide open net. Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl power the Oilers past the Stars, as this is what we want this series to be, right? We had the offensive firepower of the Oilers rear their head, and what really impressed me in this game, more than what we know they're good at, which is offense, was their defensive ability. The Stars team is nothing to scoff at. They have been one of the, best and most in top to bottom deepest teams in the entirety of the NHL for this entire season, and they've only gotten deeper as the season goes, trading for Chris Tanev, having the appearance of Wyatt Johnson, the emergence of him, I should say, and everything is just coming up stars, it seems. All their young guys are developing right now. But the Oilers defensively really has been their weakness. They've swapped between goaltenders pretty recently. Stuart Skinner came in and played incredible in this game. Their defense, like I said, in Game 7 against the Canucks, they were able to stop the Canucks from getting shots on net for almost 3/4 of that entire game. They didn't really start getting shots on net until about 10 minutes to go in that third period, when they were already down 3 at that point. And when you're going against a team with the offensive firepower of the Oilers, that's not going to get the job done. The Stars kind of were in the same boat. Now, they have a much better offense. They have much better defense than the Canucks do, and they have their starting goalie in there as well. So that gives them points, keeps them in it. But if the Oilers defense can continue to play like they have been, and if Stuart Skinner continues to play the way he has been in these last couple games, they're going to be a tough out. And that's really what's been the missing piece for the Oilers. They have now, they've always had the offensive. They've always had the offense. They've had Connor McDavid, who you can, if he keeps his pace up, you can make the argument to put him in some conversations with a guy like Wayne Gretzky, which is insane to think about, and Leon Draisaitl, who's a sniper among snipers. It'd be very, very it's very tough to stop and shut down that offense. They are definitely the best offense left in this Stanley Cup playoffs right now. but you're going up against the best defense in the Stanley Cup Finals. So it's in the playoffs right now, and this series is going to be a tough series for both of these teams. And in general, my philosophy in hockey goes, hey, we go with the goalie, and that would favor the Stars and their defense. But when you have an offense, the best versus best in this situation, it's going to be really tight. And like I was saying, if the Oilers can continue to play their defense the way they have, even just they don't even need to play great defense. They just need to play above average defense like they've been doing recently. If they can continue to play like this, they're going to be a tough out for anybody because that offense is so good. They just need to be slightly above average on defense. Heading into this series, I had it going 6 games. I had the Stars taking it in 6, but a game like this makes me really rethink a lot of it. I might be a little biased. I'm a big fan of Jake Ottinger. I watched a playoff game of his between the Stars and the Flames a couple years ago, where he stood on his head for about 80 minutes, and they eventually lost that game. But it was the greatest goaltender game I have ever witnessed. So I've got a little bit of fan bias there for the Stars, but this series I think goes 7 now. Now we've seen the Stars start slow in game 1 and 2 against the Vegas Golden Knights in the first round of this series of the Stanley Cup playoffs. They fell down 0-2 against the defending Stanley Cup champion Golden Knights team that is probably the only team in the NHL that could challenge them depth-wise. Now, they were a wild card team because they were injured, or you can make an argument they were circumventing the cap by putting their best players on long-term injured reserve. Lots of stuff like that. They went through the same process last year, and they're not the first team to do that. But it's a little shady. The Stars were able to come back in 7 though, so it's not over. I don't want to get too fired up on game 1. Recency bias is a dangerous thing in sports media, especially when you're doing a daily show. Being 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 on being in the moment is dangerous. You kind of have to take that back view. I'm still going to stick with the Stars, but I am going to push this out 7, which is exactly what we want in a series like this. Back and forth series. These games could go either way. They're either going to be close like this, and the one thing I'm worried about and why I'm not ready to switch over to the Oilers yet is just because I'm not sure how real the defense is, right? If the defense can continue to play like they did in the last 2 games, I think they're nearly unstoppable. But they have not been able to show that. Now, they did have that stretch where they won like 18 straight games. The defense and the goalie were playing great, and maybe they're having another one of those moments. But I can't sit here and count on the Oilers to have a second one of those moments in one calendar year. I mean, they were 1 win away from setting the new record for consecutive wins in the NHL. And again, that happened because, well, they made a coaching switch, and then the defense, they started playing defense again, and they were letting in less than 2 goals per game. I believe there were only 3 games in that run where they let up 3 goals or more. And I mean, if they can do that, they are an unstoppable team. And I want to see Connor McDavid get a cup. If he retires without getting a cup, which is scarily a real possibility with the Edmonton Oilers, it's a travesty. Same thing with, Austin Matthews over there in Toronto. He's also in danger. I mean, they've got plenty of time left, but he's also in danger of not winning a cup just because the Leafs are cursed. But I'm not ready to switch my prediction over yet to the Oilers. But this is a very, yeah, just like Carey Price without a cup. There's all these legends that retire without cups, and it's a shame. It really is. It hurts their legacy. Now these guys are going to be Hall of Famers regardless, but it's nice to look back and stand on the top of that mountain for even just a little bit. So we'll have to see how this plays out. This team with defense is unstoppable. It really is, and it's a scary thought to think about. But it definitely would be deserving. Now we also have to talk about the Eastern Conference. All 4 of these teams can go into unstoppable mode. The Oilers just have that ceiling that is so much higher than anybody else because they have the best player in hockey in Connor McDavid. You know, but if you're looking at a team like the Rangers and the Panthers and the Stars, they all kind of do it the same way. They all have good offense and great goalies. And if their goalie turns into a brick wall, that's what's going to carry them and make them that unstoppable team. So we'll have to see what wins. It's one offensive minded team versus three defensive minded teams. I definitely think that home ice matters at this point. I mean, it matters more in some places than in others, but if you're watching hockey games and you can feel the energy through the TV, especially in playoff games, especially in Canadian hockey markets. If you were watching Edmonton games, we'll see in game 3 and 4, you can almost feel this. You can feel the energy through the screen. You can feel it at Madison Square Garden. You can feel it in Dallas when they score goals sometimes. The issue with Dallas is sometimes their offense disappears for large stretches of time, and that's a tough look for them. But we're going to talk more hockey, actually. I'm going on to Garrison's show, the hockey podcast here on GSMC Sports Network and GSMC Podcast Network at 9:30 tonight. So if you want to tune in for more hockey talk, go ahead and show up for that. That's where me and TJ and Garrison will be on for the first 2 segments of that. So I'm excited to talk more hockey there, but we are going to move into some baseball here. There's some new rules. The robot umpires are being tossed around in the MLB. So we'll talk about whether or not that is a good idea coming up next on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you were just tuning in, we just finished talking about a thrilling double overtime game that saw Connor McDavid score the double overtime game winner just about a minute into the period. Leon Draisaitl extended his 13-game point streak now, and the Oilers go up 1-0 on the Dallas Stars. In segment 2, we talked a little bit about the NCAA rule settlement, and in segment 1, we talked about the Celtics going up 2-0 on the Pacers with Tyrese Haliburton going down. In segment 4 here, we are going to move into some baseball talk. There's been some rule changes. No glasses today. Lots of rule changes going on in the MLB recently. They put pitch clock in, and the robot umpires have been being tested out in AAA for quite some time. They are not going to be making the move to the MLB next season, and we'll talk about whether or not it's a good idea and whether or not it's a good idea to even have them in the future. But before we get into that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything you would like me to talk about, go ahead and put it in the comments. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. Once again, that link to leave a tip or donation is gsmcpodcast.net. But like I was saying, we're going to move off of the ice onto the diamond here, and we're going to talk a little bit about the possibility of robo-umpires. Robot umpires, there's a lot of different ways that this could go, and there's a lot of pushback in a lot of different circles, right? The idea that you have to get these strikes and balls calls right are obviously a huge part of the game. You know, you want to get these calls correct because as we're seeing a lot it can really affect the game. There's this great Twitter account, the it's like the ump grading. I forget exactly what it's called, but they put out a little graphic after every single game grading the umpires, and it's a really cool thing to see. You see how much it affects games and how biased some of it is. They're what their zone is looking like. Just from extrapolating the data, it's very interesting. Excuse me. It's a very interesting page to go and look at. Umpires are getting it right in the MLB about 92% of the time, which is really really good. Is a really good clip. You know, it's up almost 15% in the last since 2008. So it's been continuously going up, but it's still to the point where they're making egregiously bad calls, and there's umpires. Generally, if you're an umpire or a ref, you don't want people to know your name. If they know your name, it's not a good thing. And there's this one umpire, Angel Hernandez, that if you're following baseball, just about anybody knows, because his strike zone is famously horrendous. So there's a lot of different solutions. Robots are taking over. Like you said, Kelsey, their NFL is looking at getting rid of the chain gang, and they're trying that out in postseason, in the preseason, excuse me. They're trying that out in the preseason to see if it works better. The UFL, the spring league, is currently using that, so it works well over there. It's pretty quick. They don't have any chains for measurements. They have the physical yard markers out there, but they're just there so the players on the field can see where the sticks are, which I think is what they're going to end up switching to. It's a small change that doesn't really affect anything, but the more obvious one would be in baseball. And there's a couple different ways that they've been talking about implementing something like this. The first one is full robots, fully automated strike zone. The umpire behind the plate. It's not getting rid of umpires entirely, because you need the umpires there to call if a runner is safe or out at the plate, or all those other calls that are subjective and can't just be done really quickly by a robot just yet. So umpires, it's not like putting the umpires in there. Putting the robo ump is going to get rid of umpires entirely. Right? It's not like we're gonna make this change and there's not gonna be anybody behind the plate. It's just gonna change exactly what their job description is. Another way that they've been doing it is in AAA, which is what I think they should do, is they have a challenge system. And I know some people are opposed to challenges in sports. They think it slows it down. But if there's a ball or strike that the batter disagrees with, all they need to do is do the little challenge system. And then right away they'll buzz the machine will buzz into the home plate umpire, and it'll tell them if they're right or wrong. It's you don't get punished for getting it wrong, but it can help, and you also can't do it all the time, but only on egregious calls. And I think that's what they're going to end up doing. The idea of not putting it in, I think, again, we've talked about a lot about change in this episode with the NCAA and its sweeping changes, but people in general don't like change. It's one of the things. It doesn't really matter if it's going to help or how little it's going to change. Whenever change happens, whether it be sports or really anything else in the world, people are resistant to it because, it could be awful, but also it could be good. And this is the kind of change that's not going to affect much, and people aren't going to notice. If you remember when they put the pitch clock in recently, everybody was saying, "Oh, it's going to completely ruin the game and the pace of baseball." And it's definitely quickened the pace, but it's a good thing. You see these compilations of pitchers taking 3 pitches in the time it takes an entire inning to be pitched nowadays, and people are now blaming the increase of pitcher injuries on that, but there's a lot of other things. I think the pitcher injury epidemic is more on pitchers throwing harder than ever before, pitchers throwing with more spin than ever before, and not having the sticky stuff as an agent to help them get that spin. Pitchers are, being more explosive, and they're hitting the physical limits of the human body. Kelsey asks what happens when they go beyond the clock time. If the pitcher goes beyond it, it's an automatic ball. If the batter goes beyond it, it's an automatic strike. So there's a punishment there, and it hasn't really changed the game of baseball too much right now. It hasn't gone and, changed the way that that the game is run, and generally you don't see too many violations. Now, the in the first ever spring training when this happened, you saw a bunch of violations, but it's been a season and a half now at this point. Yeah, it's a fair system, I think, and I don't have any issues with it, and I think most people don't have an issue with it. It just leads to quicker games. It's getting more people to watch baseball. It keeps the excitement of the game of baseball that, to be fair, is very slow. And I'm a big baseball fan. I grew up watching baseball. I was lucky to grow up when I started getting into baseball. I grew up around the Washington D.C. area. When I started to get into baseball, the Nationals were good right away. Like I kind of started getting into baseball right when the Nationals started getting good. So really, that always helps you start to love a sport more. But that's not always how it works around the country. You know, there's teams, but baseball is not an easy sport to get into because it's slow and it's boring. And if you're watching it on the TV, I completely understand. I struggle to watch a full baseball game on the TV nowadays, just because again it's slow. But going to baseball stadiums going to baseball stadiums is, in my opinion, the greatest place, is the greatest live sport event to go to, because in these other live sport events it feels like you have to, basketball or hockey, you have your eye on the action at all times and it doesn't stop, and that's a good thing. But if you just want like a nice relaxed day, you go to a ballpark, enjoy the day out, go hang out with friends. I love going to baseball games. It's my favorite live sport to go to. But that's besides the point. That's a whole nother discussion. Robot umps not being in here, like I said, I don't think it's going to be a change that people are going to affect. It's going to be one of those things that happens once or twice a game where a player's like, "I think you got that wrong, ump. Let's do a little replay." And it should fix the game. It should stop these huge swings from happening. Now, there has to be some kind of limit to it, and I'm sure they're still figuring it out. I hope that this gets implemented soon, because I am tired of watching baseball games and having strikes called that are unhittable. And it doesn't happen that often. Like I said, umps are pretty good at their job, and referees in most sports are pretty good at their job, but we only notice them when they do a bad job. If you're an ump, you don't want to get noticed. If you're a ref, you don't want to get noticed. And for the most part, they do a good job. 92% is a pretty good job. But there's always those bad calls, and we want to get those bad calls eliminated from the game as much as possible. And I think having this challenge system is a great first step, and we can expand from there if we need. We can go to the fully robot zone if we need in the future. But I think implementing this challenge system for batters to challenge batters or pitchers to get challenged is something that should get called. Kelsey, did that happen today? I haven't seen that Aaron Judge got tossed. But yeah, that's always going to be a part of baseball, and baseball has more old heads than any other sport. So it's always, change is always tough to happen, especially in a sport that has so many older fans. 2 or 3 weeks ago, yeah, no, stuff like that happens all the time, and that's why I'm a fan of this robo ump system. It doesn't have to overhaul the entirety of the way that the calls are made, but it can help keep the game running smoother and avoid situations like Aaron Judge getting tossed on a bad call. But yeah. Speaking of Aaron Judge, actually, we're going to talk a little bit about the Yankees in our fifth and final segment here today. We're going to move into the Yankees GM came out and said, we're spending too much money, which is, if you've a baseball historian at this point, I guess, because that's 20 years ago, the Yankees were famous for being the big spenders. And that kind of is the opposite of what they've been known for. So we'll talk a little bit about that and what that means for baseball in the future. So stick around. We'll be right back on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you were just tuning in, we just finished talking about the robo-umps not making an appearance in 2025, what that means for the future of the MLB, and if it should be implemented at any point in the future. Earlier in the show, we talked about the Pacers losing Tyrese Haliburton and losing Game 2 to the Celtics. Now they're down 0-2 in that series as it heads back to Indiana. We talked about the death of amateurism in the realm of college sports. So it's a big deal, completely shaking the foundation of the NCAA. And we talked about the double overtime thriller between Connor McDavid and the Oilers and the Dallas Stars, as Connor McDavid scores his first overtime game-winning goal in the playoffs. And we, like I said, we just finished talking about robot umps. In this segment, we're going to finish off our show staying in the realm of baseball, talking about the Yankees. A quote came out from the Yankees, talking about how they don't think they need a $300 million roster to win a championship, and it might be too much. And we'll talk about whether or not that is right and how that kind of mindset might change the future of baseball. But before we get into that, remember, if you like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. Appreciate anything you guys do give. I appreciate you guys interacting. If you have a burning question about sports, go ahead and leave it in the comments. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. Once again, that link is gsmcpodcast.net. But like I was saying, we're going to finish off our show here talking about the Yankees. For the people that are a little less into baseball history, the Yankees had a dynasty in the 90s, and the Yankees have had a lot of dynasties, and most of their dynasties have been built on spending more money than anybody else. If you watch the movie Moneyball, the Yankees were the villains just because they would spend more money than anybody and get all the great players. And for a time, that works. You know, if you have an owner with unlimited money, like we see the Dodgers have right now, they go spend over $1 billion last offseason. $700 million on Shohei Ohtani, $300 on Yoshi Yamamoto. They went and signed Tyler Glass now as well. But $1 billion for two players is kind of insane. But when you have the money to do it, I guess that's just what you're gonna do. The Yankees usually are that team, and they've just dealt out a big contract to Aaron Judge a couple years ago. It looks like they're going to try and sign Juan Soto. Juan Soto, a guy that I don't think he's going to reset the market after what Shohei Ohtani signed, but be the second highest paid player in the entire MLB after this, which would push the Yankees' payroll pretty high up there. They're also paying Garrett Cole a lot of money. So it's an interesting statement coming from the Yankees, as they do have a lot of money coming off the books this season, but like Anthony Rizzo is one of those guys coming off the books. Lots of stuff going on there. The Yankees payroll is getting smaller, and it's kind of a trend that we've seen in baseball, especially with small market teams. Baseball is one of the only sports, maybe the only major North American sport. Not sure how soccer works exactly, and that's my fault, but maybe the only major sport in the world where they don't have a salary cap, where they don't have a salary floor, and teams like the Oakland Athletics take full advantage of that. There was the story where their entire roster was making less money than Max Scherzer in one season, and it's ridiculous. One guy should not be making more money than 26 guys combined when you're all playing professionally in the same sport. You know, you're playing in the same league. It's ridiculous at that point. And there's obviously examples of that. And small market teams are getting a little bit of a pass from me because they don't. There's not a salary cap. There's not a salary floor. They don't have the same budget as a team like the Mets or with Cohen and his unlimited money. You know. There's different excuses you can make, but there's also just being plain cheap. And that's a disturbing trend that's kind of started in the MLB. You have to be smart with your money. Unless you're unless you're the Yankees, unless you're the Dodgers, that just have or the Mets, these teams that have millions and billions of dollars just to play around with. You have to be smart with who you're giving money to. The Rays are a great example of this. They keep finding great talent for cheap, and then they finally paid somebody, and it did not go well. That he turned out to be a very bad person, and he's no longer in the MLB for good reason. But now the Rays are struggling. They have a lot of money tied up in this guy that is very bad. A very, very bad guy. But, you talk about the Royals, who went on their World Series run in 2014 and 2015, winning one of them, and they went down to the depths of the sport right after that because they didn't have the money to re-sign all their guys. And they're starting to be on the rise again. They have this great pitching. They have Bobby Witt Jr., and they're on the rise again. They're having a resurgent season, and they're a really fun team to watch. But you see the discrepancy between these teams, and with the Yankees saying they're not going to spend as much, I'm curious to see if they are going if this is going to incentivize lower money on these contracts, right? And I'm not sure if this really even means anything at all, quite honestly, because they're going to pay Juan Soto a lot of money, and it doesn't matter. It really doesn't. They're at the luxury of deciding when they want to spend a lot of money and when they want to hold out and not spend a lot of money, which is a luxury that a lot of these smaller teams have. Talking about the A's, like Kelsey said, they're moving to Vegas, not next year. They're out of their stadium. They're moving to Sacramento next year for the couple seasons before their stadium gets finished in Vegas. But hopefully when they move to Vegas, a bigger market, they'll start to spend more money, and you can start to have a fan base grow around a good team. Especially when you go to a new city, you need to build a fan base. Otherwise, and you need to not be scared to spend money, especially when you're going to a city like Vegas. You got to be able to make that gamble, and it's hopefully they're able to do it. That's the one positive with them moving to Vegas. I think it's kind of disgusting that they did that. That they just shunned the city of Oakland, because Oakland clearly loves them. I can't. Are you serious, Kelsey? Do they really make $75K a year? I might have to go do that. But no, the Yankees are a very rich organization, and like I said, I don't think this really means anything in the grand scheme of things, because they still have to go pay their guys. So we'll see if this is actually a trend that they're going to follow. But they had a deal in Oakland that the owners just didn't want to get it done. But yeah, overall, I don't think this means anything. I think this is him just saying, hey, I don't want to spend so much money. But if he has to, he will. I think this is just a public negotiation tactic with Soto to get him to come down from his number a little bit. Because I think Soto has all the leverage right now. The Yankees aren't this good without him, especially the way that Judge started out. And I don't think there's a guarantee that he even stays in New York. A little biased heart of mine wants him to come back to Washington, but that's not happening anymore. Maybe at the beginning of the season. But anyway, thank you everybody so much for tuning in to today's episode of Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. Like I said, I will be on Garrison's show, the hockey podcast on GSMC Podcast Network, later tonight. That starts at 9:30 Eastern time. Appreciate all of you guys for tuning in today. Hope you have a great weekend, and we will be back on Monday talking about everything, all the big moments that happened over the weekend in the world of sports. And I will see you then. Bye-bye.
Let's go. I'll wake up. I'm gonna put up the for me.